I watched my parents sign the Singapore contract with Jessica's name on it, the same document that in my previous life had destroyed any chance I had at a real future. The pen scratched against expensive paper as my father's signature sealed my sister's fate as the chosen heir to Chen Digital Properties. But this time, instead of crying in my bedroom like I had before, I smiled, because I knew something they didn't about Jessica's upcoming scandal that would hit the entertainment industry in exactly 3 months, and I knew that by then, my anonymous tech company would already be worth more than their entire business. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Michelle Chen, and I died at 27 in a hospital room in Austin, Texas, surrounded by machines and medical bills I couldn't afford. My family wasn't there. They were in Los Angeles, supporting my sister Jessica through another failed audition while I succumbed to stress-induced heart failure. It's brought on by years of working 3 jobs to keep our family business afloat after their financial disasters. The irony wasn't lost on me that I died alone while they invested in dreams that would never come true. When I opened my eyes again, I was 17 and staring at my University of Texas acceptance letter. The same letter that my parents would soon tell me to defer so Jessica could have the family resources for her influencer. Bootcamp in California? The morning light filtered through my bedroom window in our Westlake Hills home, casting shadows across achievements they'd never celebrated. Unlike most Rebirth stories, where protagonists wake up confused and disoriented, I felt nothing but cold clarity. I remembered everything from my previous life with perfect precision. Every slight, every sacrifice, every moment they chose Jessica over me until the day I died forgotten and alone. The house smelled like my mother's expensive coffee and Jessica's vanilla perfume, scents that once meant home but now represented everything I needed to escape. My sister's laughter echoed from the kitchen downstairs, probably showing our parents her latest Instagram post that would get 50,000 likes from purchased bots. In my previous life, I'd believed those numbers were real, just like I'd believed that family meant putting everyone else's dreams before your own. But I had advantages this time that made my quiet smile entirely justified. I knew that TikTok would launch a new algorithm in 6 months that would destroy Jessica's engagement rates. I remembered the exact date when her influencer boyfriend would be exposed for tax evasion, taking down everyone associated with him. Most importantly, I knew that the cryptocurrency I'd been secretly mining since returning to this time was about to explode in value, giving me resources my family couldn't imagine. The ironic thing about Rebirth is that it doesn't change who you are fundamentally. It just gives you the knowledge to become who you were always meant to be. In my previous life, I'd been the responsible daughter, the one who handled logistics. While Jessica pursued stardom, I'd managed our family's social media accounts, balanced their books, and quietly solved problems they created. They saw this as proof that I was meant for supporting roles while Jessica was destined for greatness. What they never realized was that I'd been the one actually running things all along. My phone buzzed with a notification from Chen Digital Properties internal systems. Access I'd maintained since I was 15 when I first started helping with their technical problems. The irony was beautiful.
Oh.
While they planned to exclude me from the business, I'd been quietly building my own empire, using their resources and connections. My anonymous app development company, Midnight Solutions, had already secured 3 major contracts with Austin tech firms, all companies I remembered would boom in the coming years. The morning routine in the Chen household followed the same pattern it always had. Jessica would emerge from her room around 10, perfectly styled for her Instagram stories about morning routines and wellness. My parents would gather around her like she was dispensing wisdom instead of recycling trending content she'd stolen from more creative influencers. I would be expected to have breakfast ready and the family schedule organized, playing the supportive sister role while Jessica played the star. But today felt different because I finally understood the game. In my previous life, I'd fought for their attention, desperately trying to prove I deserved equal consideration. I'd shown them my acceptance. Letter to UT's computer science program, my scholarship opportunities, my early admission to their graduate programs. Each time, they'd found reasons why Jessica's needs took priority, Her headshots were more expensive, her networking events more important, her emotional needs more delicate. This time I wouldn't fight for scraps from their table. I'd build my own restaurant. Jessica finally made her entrance, wearing a crop top that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her phone already positioned to capture her morning aesthetic. She'd gained a significant following by positioning herself as relatable while flaunting a lifestyle funded entirely by our parents' business profits. Her morning routine videos featured products she'd never paid for, apartments she didn't rent, and a work ethic that existed only in carefully edited clips. "Good morning, family," she announced, though she was clearly addressing her phone camera rather than us. "Today I'm sharing my authentic morning routine with all my beautiful followers." The word authentic made my stomach turn, knowing how many takes and filters went into her spontaneous moments. My mother immediately shifted into supportive mode, adjusting lighting and clearing breakfast dishes to create the perfect backdrop for Jessica's content. My father lowered his newspaper, though I caught him checking his phone for business updates during what was supposed to be family time. This performance had played out hundreds of times in my previous life, and I'd always felt excluded from their little production team. "Sarah, could you move a little to the left?" Jessica directed without looking at me. "You're creating a shadow that's ruining my lighting." In my previous life, I would have apologized and repositioned myself to accommodate her needs. Today, I simply continued eating my breakfast and scrolling through cryptocurrency markets on my phone. "Sarah," my mother hissed quietly, "Jessica is working." "So am I," I replied calmly, not looking up from my screen where Bitcoin prices confirmed my predictions perfectly. Just because my work doesn't require ring lights doesn't make it less important. The table fell silent. Jessica's phone wavered slightly as she tried to maintain her performance while processing my unexpected response. My father's newspaper crinkled as he finally looked up, reading glasses sliding down his nose in the gesture I remembered preceding every family conflict. "What work?" Jessica asked, with the particular tone she used when she felt her spotlight was being threatened. "You're in high school." I smiled without raising my eyes from my phone. "Been developing mobile applications since I was 15. My anonymous company just landed a contract with Dell for their new Austin campus." This wasn't entirely true yet, but I knew it would be by next week based on emails I'd intercepted in my previous life. The silence stretched uncomfortably as my family processed this information. Jessica's morning routine video was definitely ruined now, though she hadn't stopped recording. In my previous life, I would have never made such a bold statement without extensive proof and preparation. But Rebirth had taught me that confidence often matters more than credentials, especially when you know your predictions will prove accurate. "Anonymous company?" my father repeated, his business instincts finally engaged. "What kind of applications?" "Property management systems for smart buildings," I replied, finally meeting his gaze. "The kind of technology Chen Digital Properties should be implementing if it wants to stay competitive in the changing market." This hit exactly where I'd intended. My father's greatest insecurity was his difficulty keeping up with technological advances that were revolutionizing real estate development. He'd built Chen Digital Properties on traditional models that were becoming obsolete, but his pride prevented him from admitting he needed help adapting to new systems. Jessica finally lowered her phone, sensing that the attention had shifted away from her in a way she couldn't easily redirect. "Since when do you know anything about business?" she demanded. "You've never shown any interest in Dad's company." The accusation was so fundamentally wrong that I almost laughed. I'd been quietly maintaining their social media presence, debugging their website, and streamlining their client communication systems for years. But because I did it efficiently and without drama, they'd never noticed my contributions. Jessica's participation in family business consisted of posting Instagram stories from construction sites and networking events. Content that generated likes, but no actual value. "I've been working on your system since I was 15, I said calmly. "Your customer database, your project management software, your social media automation, just never made it part of my personal brand." My mother's face showed the dawning realization that she'd been giving credit for our family's digital presence to Jessica, who barely understood how to use anything more complex than photo editing apps. My father's expression was harder to read. somewhere between impressed and embarrassed that he'd overlooked obvious talent within his own family. But Jessica wasn't finished. She'd built her entire identity around being the family's digital native, the daughter who understood modern marketing and online presence. Having that expertise challenged by her quiet younger sister threatened her fundamental sense of self. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms defensively. "If you're so talented with technology, why haven't you done anything public with it? Haven't you built a following or created content about your supposed skills?" The question revealed everything about Jessica's worldview. To her, work only mattered if it generated public recognition and social media engagement. The idea that someone might create value without broadcasting it to thousands of strangers was incomprehensible. She measured worth in likes, shares, and follower counts rather than actual impact or income. "Because I've been focused on building something sustainable rather than something that looks good in photos," I replied. "But if you're interested in public recognition, check Austin Business Journal next Monday. They're featuring Midnight Solutions in their emerging tech spotlight." This was another calculated prediction based on my previous life's memories. The article would run exactly as I'd described, though in my original timeline, I'd read it as a nobody who died in debt. This time, I'd be reading it as the featured entrepreneur. Jessica's confidence finally cracked visibly. She'd spent years positioning herself as the family's tech expert based on her ability to gain social media followers and create viral content. Having her younger sister casually mention national business recognition for actual technological innovation was devastating to her carefully constructed identity. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I'd programmed under a false name. Midnight Solutions secured the Dell contract, signing scheduled for next week. Initial payment of $200,000. I'd sent this message to myself from my business phone to arrive at exactly this moment. Knowing my family would be curious about any interruptions during our tense conversation, "Excuse me," I said, glancing at the screen with practiced nonchalance. "I need to respond to this." I typed a quick reply to myself, making sure my thumbs moved slowly enough for observant family members to catch glimpses of words like contract, payment, and legal review. Jessica was definitely trying to read over my shoulder, though she was attempting to be subtle about it. "Everything all right?" my father asked, though his tone suggested he was hoping for details rather than expressing concern. "Just business," I replied, sliding my phone back into my pocket. Sometimes clients need immediate responses, even during family breakfast. The word clients hung in the air between us. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica had never had actual clients. Only sponsors who paid her to promote products she didn't use to audiences that weren't entirely real. My father's clients were traditional real estate developers who paid Chen Digital Properties for conventional services that could be easily replicated by competitors. But I just casually referenced having clients who needed immediate responses for technological solutions they couldn't get elsewhere. The power dynamic of our family breakfast had shifted in ways that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. Jessica attempted to regain control by returning to her morning routine video, but the spontaneous energy was gone. She fumbled through sponsored product placements that felt forced and awkward. My parents watched with the same polite attention they'd always given her content. But I could see them processing what they'd just learned about my hidden business activities. "Jessica," my mother said during a break in filming, "didn't you mention that Singapore opportunity your agent was discussing?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The Singapore opportunity was a 3-month intensive program for emerging entertainment industry professionals, essentially an expensive networking bootcamp disguised as career development. In my previous life, my parents had framed it as an investment in Jessica's future that would require sacrificing my college plans to maintain family financial stability. "Oh yes," Jessica replied, brightening immediately. "Marcus thinks it would be incredible for my career development." The program includes workshops with major casting directors, brand partnership opportunities, and access to Asian markets that are supposedly exploding for Western influencers. Marcus was Jessica's agent, smooth-talking man in his 40s who specialized in selling expensive career development programs to aspiring influencers and their families, We'd convinced hundreds of young women to invest their life savings in opportunities that existed primarily to generate profits for his company rather than advance their careers. It sounds amazing, my mother agreed enthusiastically. What kind of timeline are we looking at? The next cohort starts in 6 weeks, Jessica explained, pulling up information on her phone. The investment is significant, but Marcus says it's the kind of opportunity that only comes along once in a lifetime for someone at my stage of career development. I continued eating my breakfast, calmly while listening to them discuss the financial logistics of supporting Jessica's Singapore adventure. The numbers were exactly what I remembered from my previous life: $50,000 for program fees, plus living expenses and travel costs that would bring the total investment to nearly $75,000. This conversation had ended with my parents explaining that supporting Jessica's opportunity would require me to defer college admission and attend community college locally instead. They'd framed it as a temporary sacrifice that would benefit the entire family win. Jessica's entertainment career took off following her international training. The challenge, my father said slowly, is that this timeline coincides with Sarah's college transition. We'd already planned to support her first year at UT, and the Singapore program would stretch our immediate resources pretty thin. Here it was. The moment they would ask me to step aside so Jessica could pursue her dreams. In my previous life, I'd fought this decision desperately, showing them my acceptance letters, my scholarship possibilities, my detailed plans for contributing to the family business after graduation. None of it had mattered because they'd already decided Jessica's entertainment career took priority over my education. This time, I had a different strategy. Actually, I said calmly, setting down my coffee cup, I've been thinking about deferring it anyway. The table went silent. Jessica's phone nearly slipped from her hands as she processed this unexpected statement. My parents exchanged confused glances, clearly preparing for a very different conversation than the one I was offering them. Deferring? My mother repeated. But you've been so excited about the computer science program. I've been excited about learning, I corrected gently. But I'm already learning more from running my own business than I would from freshman lecture halls. Besides, if Midnight Solutions continues growing at its current rate, I might not need a traditional degree path at all. This was absolutely true, though not for reasons my family could understand. I knew exactly which technologies would explode in value over the next few years, which startups would succeed, and which established companies would fail to adapt quickly enough to changing markets. A computer science degree might teach me theoretical frameworks, but my Rebirth had given me practical knowledge worth millions. My father leaned forward with interest. You'd really consider postponing college to focus on your business? I'd consider postponing traditional college, I clarified. There are online programs and certification courses that would give me advanced skills without the time commitment of a residential program. Plus, I could maintain my client relationships and continue building revenue while I'm learning. Jessica was staring at me with obvious confusion. In her experience, I was the responsible sister who planned everything carefully and followed conventional paths toward success. The idea that I would voluntarily delay college to pursue entrepreneurship was completely outside her understanding of my character. But my parents were clearly intrigued. They'd spent my entire life encouraging me to be practical and responsible, to choose stable paths that would lead to predictable outcomes. Having their practical daughter voluntarily choose an entrepreneurial path that aligned with family business interests was like receiving permission to prioritize Jessica's dreams without guilt. If you're serious about this, my mother said carefully, it would certainly make the Singapore opportunity more feasible for Jessica. I'm completely serious, I replied. In fact, I think it's perfect timing. Jessica can focus on developing her entertainment career internationally while I focus on building technological expertise that could eventually benefit Chen Digital Properties. We'd both be investing in our futures, just through different approaches. This was the most elegant manipulation I'd ever executed. By framing my deferral as a business decision rather than a sacrifice, I was giving my parents permission to choose Jessica without feeling guilty about disadvantaging me. They could tell themselves that both daughters were pursuing opportunities perfectly suited to their individual talents and interests. Marcus did say the Asian markets are incredibly promising for Western influencers right now, Jessica added, clearly relieved that the conversation had shifted back toward supporting her opportunities. And the program provides direct access. 2 major brands that are expanding into international markets. I nodded supportively. It sounds like exactly the kind of strategic career development that could really differentiate you in a competitive industry. What I didn't say was that I remembered reading about Marcus's company being investigated for fraudulent business practices within the year. The Singapore program would collapse amid allegations that they'd been selling access to fake industry connections and non-existent brand partnerships. Jessica's classmates would return home with depleted savings and no meaningful career advancement. But plenty of expensive photos from their international adventure. So you'd really be okay with this arrangement? My father asked, studying my face for signs of hidden resentment or manipulation. More than okay, I assured him. I think it's the smartest possible allocation of family resources. Jessica gets the international training that could launch her entertainment career, and I get the flexibility to focus on building a business that could eventually provide technological solutions for Chen Digital Properties expansion into smart building development. The beauty of this response was that it positioned my deferral as strategic thinking rather than sisterly sacrifice. I was presenting myself as someone who understood business priorities and long-term planning rather than someone who'd been forced to compromise her dreams for family financial limitations. Jessica was practically glowing with excitement as she calculated the implications of this unexpected support. This could literally change everything for my career, she said. Already mentally planning content around her international adventure, the content opportunities alone would be incredible. Documenting my journey through the program, sharing insights about Asian entertainment markets, building connections with other international influencers. My mother was nodding enthusiastically, probably already imagining the social media content she could create around having a daughter in an exclusive international program. My father was clearly relieved that he wouldn't have to choose between his daughter's futures, since I'd voluntarily chosen the option that happened to align with his preferences. Well, he said finally, if everyone's truly comfortable with this arrangement, I think we should move forward with both opportunities. Jessica can pursue the Singapore program, and Sarah can focus on developing her business with our full support. The word support was interesting, since they'd just agreed to invest $75,000 in Jessica's career development while offering me nothing but encouragement for my entrepreneurial efforts. I didn't need their financial support. I had cryptocurrency investments that would mature into millions within the year, business contracts that would establish my reputation in Austin's tech community, and most importantly, I had knowledge of exactly which decisions would lead to prosperity versus destruction. There's one thing I'd like to request, said as my family began discussing timeline logistics for Jessica's program. Of course, my mother replied. What do you need? I'd like to spend more time with Grandma Rose while Jessica's in Singapore. I said, since I'll be working from home anyway, I could help her with any technical issues she's been having with her investment portfolio management systems. This request was carefully calculated to serve multiple purposes. Grandma Rose was the actual founder of our family's wealth. Having built a fortune through early investments in internet infrastructure and smart building technology, she'd officially retired years ago, but maintained significant influence over family business decisions through trust structures my parents didn't fully understand. In my previous life, I'd barely known my grandmother beyond holiday visits and birthday calls. She died when I was 22, leaving behind a complicated estate that my father had struggled to navigate. But I remembered enough about her background to know that she'd been a pioneering female entrepreneur in male-dominated tech industries, building successful companies through strategic thinking and technological innovation. That's very thoughtful, my father said, though I detected a slight note of concern in his voice. He'd always been somewhat intimidated by his mother's business acumen and worried about her opinions regarding his management of Chen Digital Properties. Grandma's been mentioning some frustrations with her current investment management software, I continued. Since I'll have time to focus on technical projects, I could probably develop some custom solutions that would work better for her specific needs. This was pure speculation, but I knew my grandmother well enough from my previous life to understand that she valued technological efficiency and appreciated family members who showed genuine interest in her work. Building a relationship with her would serve both personal and strategic purposes. "I think that's a wonderful idea," my mother agreed. "She's been talking about wanting to spend more time with you girls, and with Jessica traveling, it would be nice for her to have some family company." Jessica looked slightly relieved at the suggestion that someone else would be handling grandmother duty while she was building her international career. She'd always found our grandmother's business focus intimidating and preferred family interactions that centered around her entertainment industry aspirations. As my family continued planning logistics for their respective adventures, I quietly calculated the timeline for everything I knew was coming. Jessica's Singapore program would begin in 6 weeks and last for 3 months. During that time, her influencer boyfriend would be exposed for tax fraud. Marcus's company would face legal investigations, and the cryptocurrency market would experience the surge that would multiply my secret investments into generational wealth. By the time Jessica returned from Singapore with expensive photos and no meaningful career advancement, I would be established as a successful entrepreneur with a growing business, a relationship with our family's actual financial matriarch, and resources that made their support irrelevant to my future success. The morning concluded with my parents making preliminary calls about Jessica's program enrollment. While she retreated to her room to create content around her upcoming international opportunity, I helped clear breakfast dishes while mentally reviewing my strategy for the coming months. Everything was proceeding exactly as I'd hoped when I'd chosen to support their decision rather than fight it. Jessica would get everything she wanted, and discover that dreams funded by family sacrifice often turn into expensive disappointments. My parents would invest heavily in her career development and watch their chosen daughter return home with nothing to show for their financial commitment, except social media content that wouldn't generate sustainable income. And I would build the life I'd always been capable of creating, just without their interference or expectations weighing me down. As I loaded the dishwasher, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window and smiled at the young woman looking back at me. She looked exactly like the Sarah who died at 27, but everything about her was different. She had knowledge, resources, and most importantly, she had the wisdom to understand that sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing people to make the choices that will naturally lead to their own destruction. The first part of my plan was complete. My parents had chosen Jessica, just like I knew they would. I could focus on building the empire that would ensure I'd never need them to choose me again. 3 weeks into Jessica's pre-departure preparation frenzy, the familiar patterns of our family dysfunction had crystallized into a routine that would have been comical if it weren't so predictably destructive. Every morning brought new expenses for Jessica's Singapore adventure, each one framed as a crucial investment in her future success. Professional wardrobe consultations, language tutoring sessions, networking event preparation, and social media strategy sessions with Marcus's team all required immediate funding and family-wide logistical support. I observed this escalating circus from my position as the newly designated family coordinator, a role that had evolved naturally from my decision to defer college. Since I was staying home anyway, my parents reasoned it made perfect sense for me to handle the administrative details of Jessica's international career launch. Flight bookings, visa applications, accommodation arrangements, and communication with program coordinators all landed on my desk in our home office, the same space where I was quietly building my technological empire. The irony was delicious. While my family saw me as Jessica's unpaid personal assistant, I was actually using their resources and connections to advance my own business interests. Every phone call I made on Jessica's behalf included casual conversations about Austin's growing tech scene. Every email I sent to her program coordinators was copied to my business accounts for future networking opportunities. Every hour I spent coordinating her success was simultaneously building the foundation for my own. Jessica herself had become increasingly demanding as her departure date approached, a behavior pattern I remembered clearly from my previous life, but had never analyzed from my current perspective of emotional detachment. Her anxiety about leaving Austin for an international program she'd never adequately researched manifested as controlling behavior toward everyone around her, particularly me as the sister who would remain behind to handle any problems that arose during her absence. "Sarah, I need you to call the program coordinator again," she announced one morning. Bursting into the home office where I was reviewing cryptocurrency market reports on my secondary monitor, while pretending to work on her travel arrangements. On my primary screen, they haven't confirmed whether the dormitory includes professional lighting for content creation, and I absolutely cannot commit to 3 months somewhere that won't support my work requirements. The entitlement in her voice was stunning, though no longer surprising to me. Jessica had convinced herself that her social media content constituted professional work equivalent to any traditional career, despite the fact that her income came entirely from our parents' business profits rather than genuine sponsorship deals or brand partnerships. The lighting requirements she considered essential were actually just vanity accessories for content that generated minimal, authentic engagement. "I'll add it to the list," I replied, without looking away from my screens. The cryptocurrency portfolio I'd been building had gained another 12% overnight, bringing my secret net worth to levels that dwarfed Jessica's supposed social media empire. Though I should mention that most professional content creators adapt their work to available lighting rather than expecting accommodations to meet their specific equipment needs. Jessica's perfectly contoured face scrunched into the expression she always made. When confronted with practical realities that contradicted her social media fantasy world, "This isn't just content creation, Sarah. This is building an international brand presence that could benefit our entire family's business interests. Dad understands the value of investing in my professional development." I finally turned to face her, noting how she'd positioned herself in the doorway to catch the best natural light for an impromptu selfie session. Even during our private conversations, Jessica was constantly aware of her angles and lighting, performing her identity rather than simply existing as herself. Speaking of professional development, I said casually, "Have you researched the legal requirements for international income reporting? Singapore has specific regulations about content monetization that could affect your ability to maintain sponsorship deals while you're there." This question hit exactly where I'd intended it to. Jessica's entire financial structure was built on deliberately avoiding complicated business realities, leaving those details to other people while she focused on the creative and social aspects of her brand. She'd never researched tax implications, legal requirements, or regulatory compliance because those responsibilities felt too much like traditional work. "Marcus's team handles all the business stuff," she replied defensively. "That's what agents are for." I nodded sympathetically while internally calculating the timeline for Marcus's company to face federal investigation for fraudulent business practices. Jessica's trust in his team's expertise would prove expensive when she discovered that their business handling consisted primarily of taking commission from naive clients while providing minimal actual services. Of course, I agreed. "I just thought you might want to understand the basics yourself, since you'll be the one responsible for compliance while you're abroad. But I'm sure Marcus has everything covered." The seed of doubt I'd planted was subtle, but effective. Confidence in her support system wavered slightly as she considered the implications of being legally responsible for business decisions made by other people in her absence. She'd never had to navigate international regulations or handle complex financial arrangements independently. "Maybe I should ask them to send me some basic information," she said reluctantly, "just so I understand what's happening with my brand while I'm building international connections." I smiled encouragingly, while knowing exactly what she would discover when she started asking Marcus's team for detailed explanations of their business practices. The vague assurances and deflective responses she would receive would gradually reveal that her agent's expertise was limited to collecting fees from aspiring influencers rather than providing genuine career development services.
"That sounds
very professional," I told her. "International business requires more sophistication than domestic social media management. It's smart to make sure you're prepared for the increased complexity." Jessica nodded seriously, trying to project competence about subjects she'd never studied. Her entire approach to career development had been based on believing that other people would handle complicated details while she focused on being photogenic and charismatic. Discovering that international business required personal responsibility and detailed knowledge would be a rude awakening. My phone buzzed with a notification from my business account, indicating that another major Austin tech company had reached out about Midnight Solutions property management systems. I quickly switched screens to review the inquiry while Jessica continued explaining her content strategy for documenting her Singapore experience. I'm planning to create daily vlogs about the program, weekly deep dives into Asian market opportunities, and monthly collaborations with other international participants, she said, clearly reciting content plans she developed with Marcus's social media team. The goal is to position myself as a bridge between Western and Asian entertainment markets. The ambitious scope of her content plans would have been impressive if she'd had any actual knowledge about Asian entertainment markets or meaningful connections to international industry professionals. Instead, she was essentially planning to document her expensive vacation while pretending it represented serious career development. That sounds like a significant time commitment, I observed. Will you have enough time to focus on the actual program curriculum while also maintaining that level of content production? Another question designed to highlight contradictions in her approach. Jessica had never successfully balanced multiple serious commitments because her social media career had never required sustained effort or detailed planning. Creating professional content while participating in an intensive program would demand time management skills she'd never developed. Marcus says the content creation will actually enhance my learning experience, she replied, though her voice carried less certainty than her words suggested. Documenting my professional development will help me process the information more effectively while building my audience engagement. I recognize this as Marcus's standard sales pitch for convincing clients that his programs offered integrated career development and social media growth. The reality would be that Jessica would spend so much time creating content about her experience that she'd miss the actual substance of whatever legitimate education the program might offer. That makes sense, I agreed supportively. As long as you're confident about managing the workload, international programs can be more demanding than domestic opportunities. The subtle pressure I was applying served multiple purposes. By expressing concern about her ability to handle the program's demands, I was planting seeds of anxiety that would make her more likely to struggle with challenges she encountered abroad. But I was doing it through supportive questions that positioned me as a caring sister rather than someone hoping for her failure. Jessica's phone rang with a call from Marcus's office, interrupting our conversation at the perfect moment for her. To demonstrate her professional relationships, she answered with the bright, enthusiastic tone she used for all business communications. A vocal performance that sounded artificial to me, but impressed our parents whenever they overheard her industry calls. "Hello, this is Jessica," she chirped into the phone.
Oh, hi, Amanda.
I'm so excited about finalizing the Singapore details. I continued working on my legitimate business correspondence while listening to Jessica's side of a conversation that was clearly going differently than she'd expected. Her initial enthusiasm gradually faded as Amanda, whoever she was from Marcus's team, delivered information that was making Jessica increasingly uncomfortable. "I see," Jessica said, her voice losing its performative brightness. "And that deadline is absolutely firm? There's no flexibility if the payment processing takes longer than expected?" Payment processing delays were a classic sign of financial problems, either on the client side or the service provider side. I remembered from my previous life that Marcus's company had experienced significant cash flow issues during this exact time period, though Jessica and our parents had never learned about those problems until after they'd already committed to the Singapore program. "Of course I understand the importance of meeting deadlines," Jessica continued, her tone becoming defensive. "My family takes our commitments very seriously. It's just that we want to make sure all the paperwork is properly reviewed before submitting final payments." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Jessica repeatedly assuring Amanda that payment would be processed promptly while asking questions that revealed her growing concerns about program logistics. When she finally ended the call, her carefully maintained composure had cracked slightly. "Everything all right?" I asked, with genuine-sounding concern. Fine, she replied quickly, though her body language suggested otherwise. Just some minor administrative details that need to be handled before my departure date. I waited quietly, knowing that Jessica's need to process anxiety through conversation would eventually lead her to share more details about whatever problems had emerged during her call. She'd never been able to internalize stress without seeking validation from other people. It's just that they're requiring full payment 2 weeks earlier than originally scheduled, she said after a moment of fidgeting with her phone. Something about international banking requirements that weren't properly explained during the initial enrollment process. This development was exactly what I'd remembered from my previous life, though experiencing it from my current perspective made the manipulation much more obvious. Marcus's company regularly changed payment deadlines to pressure families into making financial commitments before they had time to research alternatives or reconsider their decisions. That does seem like important information that should have been included in the original program materials, I agreed carefully. Have you asked them to provide written documentation of these banking requirements? Jessica's expression showed that she hadn't thought to request documentation, which wasn't surprising given her general approach to business arrangements. She typically relied on verbal assurances from people she considered industry professionals rather than insisting on detailed written contracts. I should probably ask Dad to review the paperwork, she admitted reluctantly. He's better with financial logistics than I am. This acknowledgement represented a significant crack in Jessica's professional facade. Despite constantly promoting herself as a business-savvy entrepreneur building an international brand, she still depended on our father to handle actual business decisions and financial arrangements. That's probably wise, I agreed. International program contracts can be more complex than domestic arrangements. It's smart to make sure everything is properly documented before committing to such a significant investment. The word investment hung in the air between us, highlighting the reality that Jessica's Singapore adventure was entirely funded by our family's business profits rather than her own earnings. Despite her social media persona as a successful influencer, she'd never generated enough independent income to support her lifestyle or career development expenses. My computer chimed with another business notification, this one confirming that my morning's cryptocurrency trades had generated more profit than Jessica's social media accounts had earned in the previous 6 months. The contrast between our actual financial situations versus our family's perceptions was becoming increasingly stark. I should probably go talk to Dad about the payment timeline, Jessica said, clearly hoping to transfer responsibility for resolving the scheduling conflict to someone else. Good idea, I replied, though you might want to prepare some questions about the program structure and expectations. He'll probably want to understand exactly what services justify the accelerated payment schedule. This suggestion was designed to force Jessica to confront how little she actually knew about the program she'd committed to attending. Her research had focused primarily on the social media opportunities and networking potential rather than the actual curriculum or professional development components. After Jessica left to find our father, I returned my attention to building the business empire that would soon make their financial dramas irrelevant to my future success. My afternoon schedule included video calls with 3 potential clients. All companies I remembered would become major players in Austin's tech expansion over the coming years. The first call was with Dataflow Systems, a mid-sized company specializing in commercial property management software. Their current systems were outdated and vulnerable to security breaches, problems I could solve with applications I'd been developing since returning to my 17-year-old body. Sarah Chen, I answered professionally when their call came through to my business line. Chen, this is Robert Martinez from Dataflow Systems, the caller began. We received your proposal for upgrading our property management interface, and we're very interested in discussing implementation timeline. The conversation that followed was everything I'd hoped for when I'd submitted my proposal 3 weeks earlier. Robert's technical questions revealed that Dataflow was experiencing exactly the security vulnerabilities I'd predicted, and my solutions addressed problems they hadn't even realized they needed to solve. The integration timeline you've outlined seems very aggressive, Robert said, after I'd explained my development approach. Most contractors we've worked with require at least 6 months for this scope of system updates. I understand the concern. I replied confidently. But I specialize in rapid deployment of custom solutions for growing tech companies. My development process is streamlined, specifically for businesses that need immediate improvements without extended downtime. This wasn't entirely true, since I'd never managed a project of this scope before in either timeline. But I knew exactly which technical approaches would work because I'd seen the results in my previous life. My apparent expertise was actually just advanced knowledge of future technological developments. Could you walk us through some examples of similar projects you've completed? Robert asked, a reasonable request that I'd prepared for carefully. I prefer to maintain client confidentiality for competitive reasons, I explained smoothly. But I can provide general case studies and technical demonstrations that show my capabilities without revealing proprietary information. This response sounded professional while avoiding the fact that I didn't have previous clients to reference. The case studies I'd mentioned were based on future projects I remembered other developers completing, but presented as my own work with identifying. Details changed. The call concluded with Robert agreeing to a follow-up meeting the next week to review technical demonstrations and discuss contract terms. After hanging up, I updated my project timeline to reflect the accelerated schedule I'd just committed to delivering. My second call was with Urban Development Partners, a real estate firm that was expanding into smart building technology. This conversation was particularly satisfying because I knew they would become direct competitors to Chen Digital Properties within the year. Though my father had no idea his own daughter was building relationships with companies that would eventually steal his market share. Sarah, thank you for reaching out about our infrastructure modernization project, said Dr. Patricia Wong, Urban Development's technology director. Your proposal includes some innovative approaches that we haven't seen from other contractors. The innovations she mentioned were actually future industry standards that hadn't been widely adopted yet, giving me a significant competitive advantage over established developers who were still using current best practices. I focus on anticipating market evolution rather than just meeting current requirements, I explained. The smart building industry is changing rapidly, and systems that work today might be obsolete within 2 years. This perspective impressed Dr. Wong, who had been struggling to convince her company's leadership to invest in forward thinking technology rather than cheaper solutions that would require expensive upgrades in the near future. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need, she said enthusiastically. Too many developers are focused on immediate cost savings rather than long-term value creation. Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering technical specifications, implementation strategies, and budget considerations. By the end of the call, Dr. Wong had essentially offered me a consulting contract that would position Midnight Solutions as Urban Development's primary technology partner. I'll send over the preliminary agreement this afternoon, she concluded. Assuming our legal team approves the terms, we'd like to begin implementation within the month. This contract would be worth more than 6 figures and establish my reputation in Austin's competitive smart building market. More importantly, it would position me to compete directly with my father's business using superior technology and more innovative approaches. My third call was with Global Finance Solutions, a company that provided banking services to international businesses. This relationship was crucial for the next phase of my plan, which involved establishing financial independence that my family couldn't monitor or control. Ms. Chen, we've reviewed your application for international business banking services, said Michael Thompson, their business development manager. Your company profile is impressive for such a young entrepreneur. The company profile he referenced was carefully crafted to showcase Midnight Solutions as an established technology firm with strong growth potential rather than a startup run by a teenager from her family's home office. The financial projections I'd provided were based on my knowledge of future market conditions rather than speculation. Thank you, I replied professionally. I believe in building sustainable business relationships with financial partners who understand the technology sector's unique needs. Michael asked several questions about my international expansion plans, a topic I'd researched extensively using my previous life's knowledge of which global markets would experience tech booms over the coming years. We're particularly interested in Asian markets, I explained, knowing this would align with global finance's strategic priorities. Singapore specifically offers excellent opportunities for American tech companies to establish regional presence. The mention of Singapore was carefully calculated. While Jessica was spending our family's money on Marcus's questionable training program, I would be building legitimate business relationships in the same market using superior knowledge and actual professional credibility that aligns perfectly with our expansion strategy, Michael said approvingly. We've been looking for technology partners who understand both American and Asian business environments. By the end of our conversation, Michael had approved my application for international banking services and offered to connect me with Global Finance's Singapore office for future business development opportunities. This relationship would prove invaluable when I was ready to expand Midnight Solutions internationally. After completing my business calls, I spent the afternoon developing technical demonstrations for next week's client meetings. While listening to my family's increasingly frantic discussions about Jessica's Singapore payment deadline, the accelerated schedule was forcing them to confront financial realities they'd been avoiding, including the fact that supporting Jessica's expensive career development was straining Chen Digital Properties' cash flow. The problem is that most of our current projects won't generate payments until next quarter, I heard my father explaining to my mother in his study. And we've already committed to several major expenses for Jessica's program. Could we adjust the timeline for some of those other expenses? My mother suggested, though her voice carried little conviction. Not without compromising the quality of Jessica's preparation, my father replied. She needs professional wardrobe consulting, language training, and cultural orientation to succeed in an international program. The services he listed were all expensive add-ons that Marcus's team had recommended during Jessica's enrollment process, each one positioned as essential for maximizing her program benefits. In reality, they were revenue generators for Marcus's company, rather than genuinely necessary preparation. What about using some of the emergency fund? My mother asked quietly. This suggestion made me pause my work to listen more carefully. The emergency fund she referenced was actually money that my grandmother had provided to help Chen Digital Properties weather temporary cash flow challenges. Using it to pay for Jessica's career development would represent a significant misuse of resources intended for legitimate business emergencies. That's supposed to be for unexpected business crises, my father said reluctantly, not planned expenses. But Jessica's career development is a business investment, my mother argued. If she succeeds internationally, it could benefit the entire family's reputation and business connections. The rationalization was creative, but ultimately hollow. Jessica's social media presence had never generated actual business value for Chen Digital Properties. Despite my parents' repeated claims that her online following enhanced the company's marketing reach, I suppose we could treat it as a marketing expense, my father mused. International brand building that could open new market opportunities. I shook my head in amazement at their ability to justify poor financial decisions through creative accounting categories. They were preparing to drain business emergency funds to pay for a program that would provide no measurable return on investment while convincing themselves it represented strategic planning. The conversation continued with my parents exploring various ways to restructure their finances to accommodate Jessica's accelerated payment schedule. Each option involved either depleting reserves intended for other purposes or borrowing against future income that wasn't guaranteed to materialize. Meanwhile, my afternoon's business activities had generated more profit than Chen Digital Properties typically earned in a month, and I was building client relationships that would ensure continued growth regardless of market fluctuations. Contrast between their financial stress and my expanding resources was becoming impossible to ignore. That evening, Jessica announced that she'd spoken with Marcus's team about payment options and discovered that they offered financing arrangements for families who needed additional time to organize their investments. The financing came with interest rates that were substantially higher than conventional business loans. But Jessica presented the option as a convenient solution rather than an expensive mistake. It's actually smart financial planning, she explained to our parents over dinner, instead of disrupting Dad's business cash flow. We can structure payments over time while I'm building international connections that will generate returns quickly, enough to cover the financing costs. The logic was appealing, but fundamentally flawed. Jessica had never generated enough income to cover her current expenses, much less additional financing costs and international program fees. The payment plan she was proposing would increase the total cost of her Singapore adventure by at least 30% while providing no additional value. "What kind of timeline are we looking at for return on investment?" my father asked. Though his question revealed that he was already leaning toward accepting the financing arrangement, Marcus says most participants see significant brand partnership increases within 6 months of completing the program. Jessica replied confidently. "And the international connections I'll build should open up Asian market opportunities that aren't available to domestic influencers." I continued eating my dinner calmly while mentally calculating the timeline for Jessica to discover that Marcus's promises about brand partnerships and international opportunities were as hollow as his claims about program quality. The financing arrangement would ensure that our family would be paying for her disappointing experience. Long after she returned home with nothing to show for it, the financing option does sound more manageable than disrupting our current business operations, my mother agreed. And if Jessica's international success develops as quickly as projected, the additional cost will be negligible compared to the career benefits. They were all convincing themselves that expensive mistakes represented smart investments. It's a psychological pattern I recognized from my previous life but had never understood so clearly. Their desperation to believe in Jessica's potential success was overriding their ability to evaluate realistic risks and returns. "I think we should move forward with the financing," my father decided. "It's the most responsible way to support Jessica's opportunity without compromising other family priorities." I nodded supportively while knowing that this decision would ultimately cost them far more than the original program fees while providing no meaningful career advancement for Jessica. But my role in this family dynamic was no longer to prevent their mistakes. It was to build my own success while they made choices that would naturally lead to their own consequences. After dinner, I retreated to my room to review the day's progress. On multiple fronts, my business calls had generated 3 potential contracts worth nearly $500,000 combined. My cryptocurrency investments had gained another 8%, and my family had committed to financing Jessica's expensive mistake using terms that would benefit Marcus's company far more than our family's interests. Everything was proceeding exactly as I'd hoped when I'd chosen to support their decision. To prioritize Jessica's career development over my college plans, they were making choices that felt empowering in the moment, but would prove devastating over time, while I was building sustainable success that didn't depend on their approval or support. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on how different this timeline felt compared to my previous life's experience of the same events. Then, I'd been heartbroken by their choices and desperate to prove my worth through self-sacrifice and people-pleasing. Now, I was grateful for their predictable selfishness because it freed me to focus entirely on building the life I actually wanted rather than the life they thought I should want. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to advance my business interests while my family continued organizing their expensive disappointment. And with each passing day, the gap between my growing capabilities and their declining situation would become more obvious to everyone except themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Click and check them out.